Thank you so much. As Michael has indicated with his words about my background, I am a product of the American dream, and so is Dr. Carson, and so are many of you. Like many of the people from my generation came from less desirable circumstances. We worked very hard to get to where we are today. And for Black Americans, it was especially hard. And I can tell you that I was born in 1954. That was the year of the Brown versus Board of Education school desegregation case. And that case that ordered schools to be desegregated with all deliberate speed, in Virginia, where I was born, it took until 1968 or 1969 for the schools to be desegregated. In fact, the governor of Virginia led a massive resistance. He was a Democrat, by the way, resistance to integration. And I can also tell you that the first Republican governor of Virginia, right after his name was Linwood Holton, right after he was elected, he took his young children by the hands and walked them into Richmond public schools, and he enrolled his children into predominantly Black schools, and that was Virginia's first Republican governor. And this conference, taking place this weekend, is to honor Dr. Martin Luther King, because without his vision, and his strategy, we would not have had a successful civil rights movement. And I am a beneficiary of that civil rights movement, and so are you. Everyone in this room benefited from Dr. Martin Luther King. And if you have not read his letter from a Birmingham jail that was written in 1963, April 1963, he was in jail in Birmingham, Alabama. He wrote that letter, and if you read those words, if we were to read those words and just focus on what he was saying today, we would be so much further along with race relations, because he was not about polarization. He recognized the dignity of all individuals, and he was always very careful to include white people and Black people and all people. He did not advocate polarization. And the I Have a Dream speech and this American Dream Conference, the I Have a Dream speech was given in August of 1963. And I'm not going to do him a lot of justice by reading it, but I'm going to read those words, excerpts of that speech tonight. And I would like for you all to just think about what Dr. King said to that audience of over 200,000 people in August 1963, and also think about our nation, where we are today, and the lessons that we can learn from Dr. King. And so we're here to honor Dr. King. We're not here to tear down Dr. King. We're here to honor Dr. King. Dr. King was not a perfect man. If you go through history, there are no perfect men. Or women, or women, or women. And I would be the first to say that I am very imperfect. But here goes. These are excerpts of this speech. Dr. King said, now I wanted to play the speech, but we couldn't get permission, so I'm going to read it. I think that's okay. I'm happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous decree is a great beacon light of hope to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is badly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. So we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. In a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. The note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to distrust all white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must make the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot lodge in the motels of the highways and the hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We cannot be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their adulthood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating, "For whites only." We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and the Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, we're not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. I say to you today, my friends, though, even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream. I have a dream that one day in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification, one day, right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, "My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true. So let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curviest slopes of California. But not only that, let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. When we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every city and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last. Great God Almighty, we're free at last. When we think about Dr. King's vision, Dr. King was not an American who hated America. He believed in the American dream. He believed in our Constitution. He believed in our Declaration of Independence. He believed that all men and women were created equal or are created equal. And I believe that if Dr. King were alive today, he would be so deeply saddened by the state we are in when it comes to race relations, because we've gone backwards and we have totally begun to destroy his vision of a colorblind society. And instead of a colorblind society, what we seem to want is a color-conscious society where people are judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. That is unacceptable. And so for those of you who love America, who care about its people, who want to see true racial harmony and racial reconciliation, you have to take up the mantle of Dr. King. And we have to push back against those forces that are trying to divide us, that are trying to dredge up the worst of the civil rights, not the worst of the civil rights movement, because the civil rights movement was positive, but what they do is they cherry pick history, and the true history of America is a history of whites and blacks and people coming together across racial and religious lines, people working together to bring about a different kind of society, and we were successful. I am a product of the American dream. I am a product of the civil rights movement, and because of Dr. King's actions, in 1964, he gave his speech. In 1963, he wrote the letter from the Birmingham jail in 1963. When in 1964, we passed a major civil rights act that addressed many of the things that he talked about in that speech. In 1965, we passed the Voting Rights Act, and it made it possible for blacks all across the South, where they had been denied the ability to vote in many places, to vote. And that is why you have so many, black people in office in the South, is because we had a successful civil rights movement. In 1968, the Fair Housing Act was passed. So in my lifetime, I saw 3 major civil rights acts passed, and systemic racism ended with the passage of those 3 major civil rights acts. And what was left behind was individual racism. And individual racism is something that's rooted in the hearts and minds of all men from any racial and ethnic group. It's not confined to any particular race. Individual racism needs to be rooted out. It has reared its ugly head in our day, and we need to push back against it. We need to become the beloved community that Dr. King talked about, the one where we don't judge people by the color of their skin. We judge them by the content of their character. So thank you.